This is probably the most chaotic, hectic period I can imagine of your tenure here in Lebanon, where the story is not really about Lebanon, it's about home, and you're willing to reflect a bit on what's happening. So for me, first and foremost, it's an honor. I can't but implicate some parallel into the story. It's not the same story, it's not the same tragedy, but there seems to be a security problem that this part of the world faces. And now Ukraine is facing it in a very, very vicious and brutal sense. I can't help but feel a bit emotional because it reminds me of my own experience in Lebanon. Now, I'm going to start here, and I want to ask you, in the last 6 years of your stay in this part of the world, in Lebanon, does that resonate with you at all? Do you feel that there's some kinship in this tragedy? Or am I being a bit too romantic and trying to find commonality in the story?
We never expected such scenario in our history, in our modern history, in 21st century. It's unbelievable. And when I arrived to Lebanon, I was shocked by very tragic pages of Lebanese history, civil war, a lot of blood, shelling, bombing, destroying infrastructure, etc., etc. And now I can a bit understand why Lebanese Lebanese government especially supported Ukraine in this situation. You know that Lebanon first among Arab countries in the Arab world, first one made this fantastic statement to condemn the Russian aggression.
I think the word invasion was used implicitly. It was almost an assertion that this is an invasion. Yes. You cannot call it anything else.
And yes, I've discovered that it's really this statement is written by blood of Lebanese. It means that they really suffered from such situation. I can now compare Beirut to Kiev, you know, this shelling, bombing, when people live underground, in bunkers, in metro, it's unbelievable. My mother-in-law, Alena, she is a fantastic woman. She is 84. She is a writer. And you cannot imagine. She, when she was young girl, she remembered very well how it was during the Nazis' invasion in 1941, 1942, 1943, because there is a very serious parallel. Nazis, German army invaded Kiev, started this war with bombing Kiev 4 o'clock in the morning. Right. The same situation like this time, and she now lives underground, and she told me that it's the second time in my life.
Wow.
I see such bombing and such destruction around, and she told me only one very important phrase. These guys have no mothers.
Right.
Maybe have no children, etc., etc. It's really horror. It's unbelievable tragedy when this world now is flourishing with technologies, etc. But you have the situation when the history repeated in Kiev second time.
I appreciate the long view in this story, and very easily you're able to reflect on your own mother-in-law's recent memory. This is not ancient history. This is 60, 70 years ago. I'm curious if you're seeing a familiarity in at least, let's say, the last 15 to 20 years. And I'm narrowing it down a bit to the Lebanese context. I remember vividly. Late 2004, early 2005. Ukraine was alive. The protest movement, the Orange Movement, I think it swept international news, but I think it resonated among many that were seen to dislodge themselves from a problem bigger than their own. Mm. And of course, it's easy to forget now that the Free Patriotic Movement chose the color orange for that reason. So that's not that long ago. That Lebanon even was looking to Ukraine, in its colors at least, and its vigor. 2014. It's the more recent example of a country that stands up in these Maidan protests, and it shakes itself off of a problem that's once again bigger than Ukraine. This time around in Lebanon, maybe it's not the same exact story, but it's still trying to unravel a system that is bad for locals in October 2019. I can't help but witness, on my own terms, a familiarity where a country has the aspirations, it wants to move forward, and it's punished for doing so. And I know that obviously Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Russia, and Ukraine, it's not the same story. It's not the same security sphere. But I really sense that there is a familiarity and at least the inability to do more. And then at the same time, a lot is done at home. So is there anything there that resonates with you, just in terms of trying and yet unable because of that larger problem?
You mentioned, you started from Orange Revolution.
Yes.
I'm surprised because, it was my feeling that this war started in 2004. Mm. It was first battle of this war. Mm. And Putin lost because he tried to put on the place pro-Russian President Yanukovych.
Right.
But it was massive fraud, etc. They tried to calculate like Stalin calculated in history, and Ukrainian people said no. And it was a unique Orange Revolution, and it was also a revolution against Russia and Putin. And he was yes. Really first battle. Mm. Putin hates Ukraine. It's like it's you can see it in you can hear his voice when he's talking about Ukrainian language. No language. It's one language. No Ukrainian nation. It's one nation. No state. It's failed state, etc. It started 2004, and you mentioned then 2014. It was second battle.
Right.
Second battle, and Putin again lost second Maidan. We called it Maidan of dignity or European Maidan.
Yes.
It was exactly about the European aspiration of Ukraine. Ukraine decided to sign the association agreement in Vilnius.
Yes.
But Putin said, no, I'll give you $3 billion of credit to Yanukovych.
Yeah.
And then you will stop this process. And it was the price. You cannot imagine price for Ukrainian liberty, for Ukrainian dignity, and for Ukrainian choice or right to choose.
Yes.
And it was $3 billion. Putin saw that it's very easy to buy to buy Yanukovych or to buy even Ukraine. And it was second battle. And then Putin understood, has understood that and understands that there is no chance to change the situation. And Crimea first, it was third battle,
yes.
But in this case it was annexation. It was very serious knock and very serious battle for Ukraine. But it means this particular war started in 2014. 8 years of war. It's only maybe, I can say it, hard phase, this invasion, real, full-scale invasion. It's a new, but the beginning was 2014. And we lost for this time now it's almost 18,000 killed Ukrainians.
18,000 Ukrainians have died already in the last 2 weeks?
In the last 8 years.
In the last 8 years,
yes,
sorry, yes, from Crimea onwards.
Yes, last year.
But this way of looking back and seeing where the roots are, and I think it's almost symbolic that it was just yesterday, it's actually less than 24 hours, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon went back a bit and revised, or let's say, looked at an appeal and then issued a renewed verdict where you now have 2 additional names in the assassination of Rafiq Hariri and those attempted and successful ones, 2004 to 2005. And this is happening in 2022. I think Lebanon was equally punished for pursuing a path that would actually condemn and potentially arrest criminals involved in political crimes. And I think the aspirations of people on the street here is to try to get out of that permanent nightmare. In the last 2 to 3 weeks, I've seen something that I think everyone who's paying attention, I think to different degrees, feels the same way. A country that is punished for no justified reason, and a very brave and dignified people refusing to bow down. And within that story, millions of brave Ukrainians. It's rare to see something like Volodymyr Zelensky, who's perhaps a more unusual leader in good times and bad times. He's shining, and he's shining bright. And I think, in the long run, it's this kind of leadership that is so electric and so infectious. People will look back and see you don't have to bow down. And if you're going to lose, you're going to lose with glory. I want to reflect on your side, having seen what's happening from here. Do you think of this as a lost battle? Not a lost cause, but a lost battle. And the reason I'm being a bit bleak here is because the Lebanon that both of us have seen the last few years, it's been on a downward spiral. And I can't imagine this country in the short and medium term entering a better phase. I see a very bleak situation. Do you sense something similar happening in Ukraine, that despite all efforts, there isn't much more that can be done? And I'm going to maybe hint at the deep reluctance to have a no-fly zone, the reluctance to even have these jets being potentially offered from Poland to Ukraine, that there's sanctions, there's world hysteria, but there isn't much more that can be done to curtail what Putin is doing in Ukraine. And I hope I'm asking this in a fair way, without sounding too negative or too condescending, more that it's a fait accompli. Lebanon couldn't, and perhaps Ukraine cannot.
Yes, you mentioned about these parallels of Lebanese and Ukrainian history. Take a look. We are talking about 3 attempts to kill Zelensky. You mentioned Hariri's assassination, yes, and it was a very tragic page in Lebanese history. But really, Zelensky is a very brave man. You're right. He is now a real hero. And sometimes I can hear even that he is now a leader of new free world.
Yes,
I can say.
It's online, it's social media,
just to compare these 2 presidents, one is 22 years old, 22 years in power, yes, in Russia.
Yes,
started from 2000.
Yeah.
In Ukraine, for last 30 years, we had 6 presidents. This is freely elected, democratically elected president, and this is the difference. Why? One more, also, I can say. Problems, because Putin doesn't like, as a neighboring country, democratic, open, with very strong civil society. For him, it's a real threat, because he tries to be. He is a picture of authoritarian leader. Yes, it's unbelievable, and now we can see this zombie civil society. Oh my God!
That's when we know we're in Lebanon, right?
Yes.
No, we can keep talking. It actually fits
Okay.
the mood.
Okay.
Don't
Okay.
worry.
Yes. Okay. It's a difference, and it is why they try to kill Zelensky like it was in Lebanon. You know. Yes, you mentioned about closed sky. Yes, you know, I can tell you that nobody expected such strong Ukrainian army, such strong defense, and such heroic Ukrainian guys, Ukrainian soldiers, because they really fighting for freedom, first of all, for families, for Ukrainian history, even for history, because Putin tries to steal Ukrainian history. Even it's also one of more Putin's arguments. Yes, we stopped Russian army because we are motivated, and Russian army is now very weak. Despite that it is the second largest and strongest army in the world. Yes, there is no any more myth about so-called strong Russian army, and of course it will be impact on Syria and other regions like Moldova, Georgia, because Ukraine is on the list of many countries. You mentioned Syria. You mentioned we can also mention Libya, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's Moldova first of all, then Georgia, Abkhazia, and Ossetia, then Ukraine, and even Kazakhstan. You know, it's unbelievable because I told Lebanese people, you know, imagine that you are protesting against prices for fuel. Like it's very high prices, and we each and every day we are protesting. And then your neighboring country decided to invade you because of this protest. And Putin did it. Yes. Only the reason was the high prices for fuel. And it means that yes, we need this close sky because it's only one very weak element of our defense. And I started our conversation with John Lennon. Yes, all we need is sky, close sky. Yes, it's really very important for us. And
I'm only interrupting you with just I'll try to justify this interruption. The love that John Lennon speaks of, and I think the no-fly zone appeal and the sincere appeal from not just Zelensky, but I think many people have come to terms with it, that you can't really alter the scenario otherwise. If we assume that it won't happen, do you predict a paralysis in Ukraine that could be long and very costly, akin to what has happened to this country? And I'll offer just one more analogy, and I'm sorry I interrupted, but we had a Lebanese president in 1989 killed as the Syrians entered and invaded, later occupied. Our current president at that time was an anti-Syrian general in the Lebanese army. He fled the palace and left Lebanon for 15 years. And Syria's role in Lebanon doesn't start in 1989, but it solidifies itself. And it becomes a very long generational chapter of Lebanese trying to deal with a security problem. I see something similar happening, where it's not a clear defeat for Putin, or for that matter, a clear victory, that it's a paralysis that bad actors become central to. And is there anything there that, even if Zelensky survives this round, even if the Ukrainian regime maintains itself, Ukraine has now become one of Putin's conflict zones that he can, in a way, use for his own survivability. And maybe I'm being a bit too far-fetched here, but I don't see good news happening.
I understand you. You know, it looks like each and every day now is in favor of Ukraine. With each and every day, Ukraine becomes stronger because of Russia becomes much weaker. Why? First of all, Russia now tries to invade the whole Ukraine, but in some days, it will be second front. Russia will fight against Putin, will fight against Russia, because he already killed 12,000 young men.
Yes.
It's his responsibility. This blood is on his hands, and still Russia doesn't know about it. There is
blackout almost.
Yes, you know, no information. He closed Дождь, Echo Moskvy. He closed Новое Время. It means it's like Russia is now in 16th century. I don't know. Okay, maybe it's not so good parallel.
At least an information.
Yes,
there's an information blackout.
But you know, it will be second like in the history. It's first moment, which is very important. Secondly, Ukraine now is so strong, especially consolidated with all regions, all small and big cities, and this energy is anonymous. It's fantastic. It looks like Ukrainians are able not only to fight but to make this reconstruction in very short time. And I know that will be fantastic support from countries, etc., from Europe, from United States, Canada, etc. But it's like I see it because it's unique, consolidated country. Concerning this close sky, there is I'm a bit diplomat, and there is maybe one more scenario which is like first step towards this closed skies. It's nuclear power plants. We should close sky at least around 4 power plants in Ukraine, and it will be very substantial support for.
These are the
Ukraine.
Nuclear power plants,
Yes.
I assume. This may be a mute detail here, but is it that 2 of them have already been taken over? Is that correct?
It's correct. It's Chernobyl.
Right. Yeah.
And it's Zaporizhia. By the way, I was shocked, not shocked, I was surprised with your article about, you mentioned Chernobyl.
Yes.
You know, it's also, Chernobyl, it's like Ukrainian symbol, but even not Ukrainian. It's about freedom, freedom of expression. Why? Why Soviet Union was dissolved actually? Why? 1991. Because of 1986 Chernobyl, and Ukrainians, and not only Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians, they discovered that communist leadership is lying. Each and every day is lying. Everything is okay. Don't worry. We can go for parade 1st of May, etc. And it was so horrible lie, and people said no more. By the way, you mentioned also Beirut blast.
Yes.
And now it's about Lebanese. Lebanese want to know what happened in the seaport, why it actually was possible, etc., etc. It's normal, and it was actually this dissolution was started in Chernobyl, and now I'm sure it's about Putin and his Russia. When people, it will be second Chernobyl for Putin, and it means that it will be, I can say, it can be. I'm not sure, but it can be second revolution. It can be very strong protest, but it will be Chernobyl for Putin.
I actually, the way it's laid out, as in he is doing many things that are familiar in the 1980s, where there's a security sphere that is largely unstable, and you slip and you make mistakes. And I appreciate the reference you alluded to, and I'm honored you read this article, that you can look back in time and see that the largest nuclear disaster in history was one giant, almost the inertia was inevitable, that the Soviet Union would not be the same. And I sense that the Beirut port blast, long term, we will look at our own security nightmare, which involves many actors but is largely under Iran's sphere. I think we will look long term at this was something that you can't retreat from. There's no going away. You can't hide it. And I appreciate your optimism, and I find it almost, it's what I should hear from you, that the Russians are losing in Ukraine, and that the Ukrainians are standing up. And all of this is true, and that no one has surrendered. But I just don't know what can emerge from this that is good for Ukraine. And I'll go a bit back in time again. 1991, after a very bloody, very costly Syrian invasion turned occupation, this country is forced to sign a security alliance with Syria. It's called the Treaty of Brotherhood and Cooperation. And Putin is using familiar language. We all know this stuff. One people, two states. It's almost boring the way he describes it. You can say it for any region, it doesn't matter. But we ended up in a nightmare. And this is not something that could be easily overthrown. I sense that this is the end game, that Ukraine will be forced to go back to the choices that it was forced to make. And I'm going back in time a bit now, but it's not that long ago. I hope I got this right. In 2014, the protests in Ukraine, the Maidan, the dignity protests, was largely against forging a bilateral framework with Russia that was largely unpopular at home, and dismissing EU talks. I mean, forget NATO. EU alone was too much. And here we are in 2022, where the country is really being punished. I can't see this going in a better direction. Even if, long term, if you take the long view, perhaps Putin's order is going to eventually end. But that could be well past our prime. That could be many years from now. So at least in the near term, is there... I appreciate the optimism, but what do you see happening on the ground?
Yes. First of all, if you're talking about scenarios, there is a idea. I remember Christo Groziev from Bellingcat mentioned that there is a scenario of frozen conflict, like in Moldova, like in Georgia, Transnistria. I mean. But Ukraine is too big for frozen conflict and too strong. I'm sure that I can tell you, and it's my my vision of the situation. Putin is coming to the end. The era, Putin's era, will be over very soon.
Very soon.
Very soon. And why? First of all, it's only the beginning, yes, but it's very clear messages, very clear pictures. Yes, when for Germany, France, etc., they introduced the personal sanctions against Putin.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable. I never expected such scenario. But when nobody wants to talk to Russia, when Lavrov is speaking on the name of Russia on the session of UN human rights session in Geneva,
people leave.
It's unbelievable. It means that it's very serious signs.
Yeah.
All people Even I've heard the story in some European restaurants. Some Russians came in, and the owner of the restaurant said, "You are Russians?" "Yes, we are Russian." Goodbye. Even it's unbelievable story for Russians. It's tragedy for Russians, but I see a very clear picture. Russia will be different. There is a very small but very serious signs of future of changes. Yes, and my prediction is that it takes maybe half a year, no more. Putin's era, and then it will be very serious turmoil, very serious turbulence in Russia.
I see. So you're seeing it happening now, in a sense that it's already started.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sorry. I want to. That is a very. That makes me rethink my own assumptions. I thought that this is the beginning of a concocted, protracted, pseudo-civil war on Russia's terms, where Ukraine fractures and becomes similar to Lebanon in the 70s and 80s, or worse, the Syrian scenario takes hold, where you have a pro-Russian president surviving with proxies, and Syria is paralyzed. I appreciate that you see it the other way.
It's not a case.
Interesting.
For Ukraine, because they tried to bring back Yanukovych.
Yes.
In Ukraine, included naphthalene, old and very bad smell, etc.
He's still in Russia, if I'm not mistaken.
He is coming back and forth to Minsk, to Rostov, to Moscow.
Yeah.
He tries to come back.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's scenario for Moscow, because they are strange people. They think that he is still a legal president, and it's only one way for them.
But since 2014.
But forget about proxy governments, etc. It will be very strong. If there is a strong consolidation, there is no any chance to divide Ukraine now. Any chance.
Really?
And this scenario is impossible for Ukraine.
We're talking
even in Russian-speaking cities, for example, Kherson, Kharkiv, Melitopol, Mariupol, especially, you saw these manifestations. All people came to the main Maidan with blue and yellow flags, and Russia go home. Barra, barra, barra.
I wasn't expecting that one. But
okay,
6 months though.
But just to finish our prediction, 2014 is coming back, but in a bit different scenario. Our relation with Europe. Now on the table there is a Ukrainian application to EU. And yesterday it was very special forum, I can say. It's an informal meeting of European leaders. I know that it was very serious battle, because some leading countries are not in favor till the end, I can say, yes. But yesterday it was very clear message to Ukrainians that we would like to see Ukraine in EU. It means that there is very strong team now. We are part of a larger team.
Yeah.
It means that we are not alone. Like Syria, for example, yes, we feel this support, and this reconstruction will be much easier. We are talking about Marshall's Plan or land lease, etc. And it will be in Ukraine. It will be new, totally new country, very modern, with very smart people. And I can say I see Ukraine as one of the new centers of European Union. And together with Poland, and especially this Eastern European part of EU, it will be a very strong political player.
I really appreciate this very, very optimistic view. I'm in no place to challenge. I'm only from my understanding, and I'm sorry if I'm being again a little too negative here. I think of our part of the world, having gone through what Ukraine is going through for a much longer period of time, except that Ukraine is maybe more violent in terms of the recent weeks, but it's very hard for me to see Putin on the brink in this coming stretch. In the much longer view, I think that's inevitable. But in the short term, it's hard for me to rationalize this. And I honestly don't... You alluded to this earlier, and I think there may be parallel here. When the Russians rise up against Putin, I think it becomes easier to imagine a more tranquil, stable scenario for Ukraine. But short of that, I can't see this ending well in the near term. It's almost like when the Iranian people decide that they've had enough. Or for that matter, if the Syrians try once more and they succeed. I can imagine a situation where Lebanon gradually improves. But short of that, I don't see that happening. So am I reading you right that you think Putin is near the end, and therefore
Yes.
Ukraine, the horizon is very bright for that?
Exactly. He's strong.
Yeah.
But first crack is
Yeah.
very clear for me. Yes, and he spends a lot of time in bunker.
Right.
And this type of leaders, KGB leaders, yes, it's very typical for Russia. And we know about Stalin and his end, and it will be maybe something like it was with, I don't know, but there is no anymore this support for hero, for great president, etc. Because and even elections, it will be next year in Russia, yes? 2000.
Yes.
24.
24.
It's in 2 years, yes. But even if he will survive the elections, it will be not so. It will be, from my point, impossible to be re-elected. But it's not the case. It will be maybe. I can say 2022. It's very special. 2022. It's very special numbers. I'm for this, from this point of view, I'm optimist.
And
it will cause very serious changes in security structure around the world. It will be new situation with Crimea, Donbass, of course, Moldova, Georgia, Syria, definitely. And it means Putin I can say, destroyed this security configuration format of Helsinki 1975 with territorial integrity of countries and the right for small people, small nations like Lebanon or mid-sized like Ukraine to be a part of this civilized world. Putin destroyed this system, but now there is a chance to come back. And it will be one more chance for new, I can say, new world.
You know, it's interesting today, the Finnish president, I believe it was on BBC, he's in the United States talking to Biden about this war. And it's a healthy reminder that it's not that long ago, a country like Finland, along the border with Russia, had to make its own decisions that seemed to be trying to play a more neutral, more disassociational policy, where they didn't join NATO and they joined the EU. And I believe they're still not in NATO, but they've opened the door. And this is something very new, almost unexpected, that Finland could theoretically now go down that road, which to me, it resonates that this means there's a weakened Putin next door. I share the same optimism in the longer run that this part of the world, and I think Eastern Europe, there is a positive ending to this story. But I really appreciate that you're seeing it happening much faster. And I'm going to try to narrow this down to the last maybe month. it's obvious that most people were caught off guard, or at least most analysts did not anticipate this type of full-scale invasion. I think even in the last few hours, it was still not expected. These declaration of independent states on Russia's terms, I think many people thought that was the end. And then hours later, we're watching what's happening. I'm going to be very diplomatic. I'm going to be very careful when I ask this. And you tell me if this is off, if I'm misreading, or if I'm using the wrong tone even. With your understanding of Putin's positioning, and you eloquently laid out the reasons why his end will happen, but in this recent stretch, was there any anticipation within Kiev, within the regime, among the diplomatic corps, that this could happen, that a full-scale invasion could happen? And I heard whispers of this was a forecasted scenario, but seemed to be the least likely one. But in your conversations, in your understanding, was there a risk in what the Ukrainian regime was doing, and the cost, maybe, knowing that Putin could go down this road? And here I'll insert a parallel. The last time I believe Lebanon tried to do something on its own was in early May 2008. Infrastructure, airport, sovereign measures. There was in a way, a curtailing of Hezbollah's activity in this country. Within hours, the streets of Beirut turned into a mini civil war. And the story ended there. Hezbollah's role has become paramount in the security affairs of this country. This translates into Iran. I don't know if those considerations were taken, but I do know that it's the right of any country to do that. Yet, the same country falls. So was that even in the calculations, that Putin could go down this road for his own survivability?
As I mentioned at the beginning, we did not expect any serious invasion. We tried to play this role of country which is looking for the peaceful diplomatic solution situation. We even showed to European Union, to all countries like United States, Canada, that we do not threaten the Donbass.
Yes.
It's not true. So they shell in children's gardens, etc.
Yeah.
They tried to make something like evacuation, etc. It was all of these things. They were fake. It was fakes. Yes, fake, and fake. And we even our president recently mentioned that we were not ready.
Right. Yeah.
Because it was, from our point of view, it was impossible. But the United States, they already knew about it. It looks like it was very clear picture for security services. Now we see this. We see this so-called preparations with signs on the roads, for example, with sleeping groups of Russians in Kiev, etc. It was long time preparation, and I was surprised when we watched Putin's statement about Ukrainian invasion, about so-called special operation.
The 1 hour speech where he
only about Ukraine.
Yes.
It was not about NATO and about America.
Yeah.
It was about Ukraine,
Yeah.
because I don't like this discussion in Arab world, for example, with Arab journalists and experts, that this is war between Russia and United States, Russia and NATO, and Ukraine is just a small coin in this game. It's not true. This is long-lasting Ukrainian-Russian war. We had such wars in 17th century, 18th century, 19th century,
You
20th
go
century.
back in time for this, for what's happening now.
Yes, we fought for independence many years, and we restored, for example, independence in 1818, but then lost in 1921, and then again in 1891, etc. But yes, it's not the war between Russia and against the United States.
Right, yeah.
It's Ukrainian-Russian. It's Russian aggression to Ukraine. Okay, it means that you cannot imagine. He recorded this message. It was 21st of February.
Yes, right. Yeah.
All this war started 24th. Yes, February 24th, and he also had a negotiation with Macron and Scholz, and it was recorded. It was ready, and he lied to European leaders. No, we'll try to find a peaceful solution, etc. It means it's not about European situation, not about America, not about NATO. It was very clear intention to invade Ukraine.
So looking back,
but we did not expect.
Right. So
Definitely.
This is almost it's hindsight, but it's very recent hindsight that you can now almost point at. You see it happening, but in those hours before, did it surprise you as well that this happened? Were you equally surprised when you found out that there was a full-scale invasion?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was. It was unbelievable. It was a nightmare, you know.
Yeah.
And especially first thoughts. It's about families, about kids, about grandkids, etc. They are in Ukraine.
I think I saw you on the street with protesters 2 weeks ago. It was there were protests near the Russian embassy, and if I'm not mistaken, you were there.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I saw many of these. I saw it, and I could see you that you were very proactive within hours, trying to explain to locals here, but also an international audience, what exactly is happening. And also, there are statistics I wasn't aware of. Something like 10 to 11,000 Lebanese students have studied in the Ukraine in recent years.
Yes.
It's a significant number, and that there's a very dynamic Lebanese-Ukrainian population. So this to me is quite fascinating. That you almost these are stories you don't hear, and then they're all coming home now. And for me, this is so bizarre, where Lebanon plays refuge to Ukraine.
Yes, you know, it's over 12,000 students.
Over 12. Okay.
Over 12.
So sorry, that's not the current number.
For this moment, current number is 1,000. And 275 students.
Right. Okay.
This year.
Yes.
Number.
Yeah.
They are back. I hope more, maybe 90%.
Okay. Yeah.
Take a look. It's about solidarity and about support and about this connection, family connection. When in Beirut, it was very sad story, blast and support, etc. Crisis, economic crisis. All these families moved to Ukraine.
Right.
It was, like second home.
Right.
Yes, and then Lebanon was empty. I mean, a lot of people went out from Western countries, but also a lot of countries went to Ukraine. And then now it's opposite situation. Yes, families moved from Ukraine to Lebanon, but it's about this support and solidarity. You know, it's we are interconnected, and it's really about this historic connection and modern connection. And we try. You know, Ukraine is one of the suppliers of wheat, food, flour, sugar, etc. Sunflower oil, etc. to Lebanon. And now all Ukrainian ports are closed by Russians. And there is a problem in Lebanon.
Yes.
We are interconnected, and it's very clear picture. And Putin now shells. There is a bombing on Kharkiv, for example, or Kherson, Mariupol. A lot of Lebanese students lived in these areas. You know, it's also it is also why Lebanese government made this statement. Of course, it's
an unusual.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's unusual,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's also country is suffering.
Yes.
Even from this aggression, and all these connections were destroyed.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I appreciate that. Even the economic one, I think, will be felt in the coming weeks, where wheat reserves deplete, and I think Ukraine and somewhat, to a smaller degree, Russia as well. Wheat comes from these two countries only.
Yes.
And the fact that it's stalled, there will be a crisis pending here, but economic parallel, security parallel. At the same time, I really feel, and maybe this is from being here too long, I still can't see this happening as quickly, as rapidly as the way you're describing it, although I want to subscribe to what you're saying. I think on the other end of the story, I've heard skeptics talking about Lebanon's foreign policy, that it should no longer be a positively neutral state, even if it isn't, but that it should finally let these things go and stand tall when principles are violated. I think you can do both. I think you can fully support and stand up for Ukraine, and at the same time not want that conflict to become part of your own story. So I think the two are not mutually exclusive. I'll end it with
I just can add, it's also about the territorial integrity of our countries.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine always supports Lebanon,
yes,
in all votings in frame of United Nations, and it's also some kind of reciprocity, even if you're talking about diplomacy. But as I mentioned, yes, it was this wording was based on Lebanese blood and very serious suffering. Sorry.
No.
Yes.
But I mean, it's one of those rare occasions where Lebanon says the right thing.
Yes.
And
it was so important for whole Arab world, because then second phase, it was the decision of all Arab countries to vote in favor of Ukraine in frame of United Nations. It means that it's really revolutionary step, but which was supported by all Arab world, League of Arab countries.
Was it? I might be wrong here, but didn't the UAE, wasn't it more skeptical of that type of language, that they were blazonly not describing it as an invasion?
We are talking about voting.
Oh, just the yes,
voting.
Right,
yes,
right. Yeah.
Lebanon was first one and very clear. But I'm talking about this voting. It was only text of resolution.
Right.
Sorry.
No. I'm sorry for. I wanted to try to find an analogy from what you've seen here. We have 1 million Syrian refugees still here.
Yes.
500,000 Palestinian refugees, if not more, for 3 generations. There are Iraqi refugees here too, but let's focus in on the Syrian refugee. Over 1 million in horrible conditions to this day. And chances of a political solution reaching Damascus seem bleak, at least so long as this order continues, or disorder continues. It's been over a decade. We see nearly 2 million, if not more than 2 million Ukrainian refugees have fled the Ukraine. Is the optimism that you share about Putin's near demise, does that extend to a situation where these are not refugees that settle abroad, that they go home quickly, that Ukraine is not depleted of its brightest and its most ambitious? And do you see that Syria perhaps is an extreme case rather than the usual?
A lot of parallels. I remember Aleppo very well. This shelling, bombing, using chemical weapons, etc. Ukraine, the same situation, bombing.
Same discussion. Civil
population, kids, a lot of killed, etc. And now the discussion about chemical weapons is on the table, and Russia tries to spread the fakes about Ukrainian biological weapons, chemical. It means that we should be ready for Syrian scenario. I mean, use chemical weapons. Okay, one more point. Yesterday, Putin announced that he is ready to receive such support from Arab countries, but it was only one country, it was Syria, around 20, he mentioned 16, but there is even another number, 20,000 Syrian soldiers to support Russia.
Yeah.
It's also a very serious sign. First of all, it means that Russia is out of soldiers, out of troops, and they are looking for so-called Syrian support, but they are not soldiers who can fight in Ukraine. It's impossible. It's a very, very serious threat for Syrians.
Right.
And but what does it mean? From Syria, 20,000, for example, we can say 20,000 Syrian troops went out from Syria. What about Syria?
Right.
Yes, you understand me.
Yeah.
Yes, but
that's the security machine.
Yes.
That sees itself falling. I
Yes,
think that's
yes.
going back to your prediction.
Absolutely, yes. And I see that there is a chance for Syria. There is a chance for Syria, even if we are talking about these troops. It means some kind of changes, and we carefully follow, of course, Turkish position, etc., in the region, and it means that this Russian power in Syria now is weakening day by day. And also, it's a risk for Syria and for I can say for the possibility for Syrians to decide to vote for their own fate.
But you don't see the Ukrainian tragedy turning into a decade-long refugee problem. You don't.
You mentioned You mentioned refugees. Of course, it's different situation, and Ukrainians will be back. Definitely, it's time. They are very, I can say, bright brains, etc. Very active people, businessmen, etc. And mostly now it's women, children. They will be back, at least for family reunion.
Yes.
We are talking about family reunion. But in Syria, it's different situation. But there is a chance to change the situation with Syrian security, and then it's also a chance for Lebanon, because maybe this all Syrian refugees, this almost 2 million, 2 million.
It's very. Yes. I mean, and the long term is the problem, really.
Yes.
That without political solutions, this is a population that just suffers endlessly. I go back to your optimism.
Just to conclude, there is a chance that it will be a peaceful solution for Syria, and some refugees from Lebanon will go home to Syria. There is a chance.
Right.
There is a chance.
Ambassador, I'll ask you one final point, and it echoes the way you looked back in time, that it's a historic story between Russia and Ukraine. And I appreciate that you're discounting the Russian-American problem when it comes to Putin and Zelensky and this current quagmire. I share that view with you. Imagine a Russia that is not led by Putin, and imagine a Russia that no longer has that kind of leader the way you described him. Whether he's paranoid or operating from a bunker or maybe misreading the situation. Will there always be this type of problem, regardless of who is running the Kremlin? In other words, is this a security problem that extends beyond Putin's Soviet desires? That this is an existential problem, at least in terms of what you're saying, which is a very quick end to Putin's regime, and then years from now, would this problem come back?
Very serious question. I remember Yeltsin's era very well, and it was democratic Russia. Even this freedom of media was unbelievable in Russia. And I remember that even Yeltsin, his joke about Ukraine, he told that every morning I'm waking up, I'm thinking, what can I do for Ukraine? But at least if two countries talking about the dignity, about the respect, about this respect of territorial integrity, I'm talking about bilateral agreements, etc. Everything was done for this peaceful coexistence of two countries. Everything was okay, business, cultural connection, etc. And only one man who decided there is no Ukraine, there is no Ukrainian culture, history, etc. It's failed state. Okay, we should destroy the state. It's my opinion that this war is not war of Russia against Ukraine. It's war, Putin's war against Ukraine.
So you narrow it down more to him.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Of course, I understand that this regime is still KGB, I can say, FSB regime is very strong. But what happened now, it's real disaster for Russia. And I understand that it will be very serious consequences for Russians. And I feel that these people should go on the streets and to talk to each other and to try to change the situation. It's my feeling, and we will see what happens.
Your perspective is I could do this for hours because I've learned a lot just by speaking for 1 hour with you. My heart is with your president, your people, with Ukraine. Every morning I'm stunned, whether it's seeing social media and seeing how Ukrainians are resisting. Sometimes there's a comedic element that is well appreciated, and I think Ukrainians are creative in how they resist. It's something that the world is witnessing, and I have not had one conversation that has not included that sentiment, that this is a very brave, very dignified population. And I'd like to subscribe to the way you're seeing things. You have far more, you are in the story, you're a diplomat, you're able to see it much better than me. I really hope that the way you're describing events, I really hope this happens. I think it would be better for everyone. So
yes, thank you very much for
Thank you.
this conversation. I just like to say that you mentioned about my 5-year term in Lebanon. It was very quiet on the beginning, very turbulent in the mid-term, but now it's a real war, real fight. But I can tell you, I'm really proud that I'm a Ukrainian ambassador during this Ukrainian defense, Russian aggression. and I'm proud of my people. I never expected it will be so united, so strong, and this name of Ukraine now is changed. Now everybody is talking about nation of heroes, and I'm proud of Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian people. And maybe one more joke. Ukrainians talking, discussing the issue of NATO and entering NATO, etc. But one man told me, it looks like in a couple of years will be discussion when NATO will join Ukrainian army.
That's well said.
That's the point.
Couldn't end it better than that. Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you.
It's an honor.